That was great.
I thought about this last time, yeah.
Damn it. All right, all set?
Yeah.
Hi everybody, it's Randy with Direct Action Combat Performance.
Hey guys, and Sam from Adaptive State Performance.
And we got a couple of questions from the YouTube channel that we're going to address today. And if there are components of these questions that we answer that you would like us to elaborate on, by all means we can do that. And again, as always, this is designed for you, so feel free to place your comments in the comments box and we'll address them as they go. All right, so the first question is it's a great question by Ryan S. from the YouTube channel. I think I know who this is, a gentleman from out west. And he's asking about the balance between more work and rest versus recovery to prevent injuries and your overall health, which is definitely a concern and a consideration. But basically what his question is asking is, how do you listen to your body and balance between training another session or getting an extra hour of work? Good question, and I think this is one we could probably unpack a little bit because there's multiple layers to this one.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a really awesome question, Ryan, and it's definitely something that I feel like we're going to spend quite a few minutes going over because it's so multifaceted. But my first thing I would say is that your body is not adapting while you're training, it's adapting while you're recovering. So you made a super important point that there is a very important balance between how much work you do and how much you recover, because at the end of the day, like I just said, you're getting the benefits of the training when you're recovering. So you definitely need to balance those two, and I think everybody's a little bit different, but we talked about this in the last video, how when we're programming for people who train really, really hard, we'll do a day on, a day off, or you only do 4 a week, so we're forcing you to take some extra rest. Or if you really are a go-getter and you want to do something every single day, then we tell you, okay, you know what, these are your 4 sessions we want you to complete, but on the other days, keep your heart rate below like 120, so that we're kind of putting a cap on how hard you can work so that your body is getting some rest and recovery. Another thing I would say about that is, if you think about the fact that there's 24 hours in a day and most people train for an hour, you still have 23 other hours in the day. So what are you doing with the other 23 hours of your day? So if your question, which it was, is if you have to choose between an extra hour of sleep and an extra hour of training, my first question for you would be, what about the other 22 hours? So how much time did you already dedicate to sleep? And if it's not enough and you feel like you aren't training enough, what other pieces of the day can you take from to allocate more time for sleep, so that you don't have to compromise between training and sleep? I don't think it should have to be one or the other. I think that both of those things should be kind of like a mandatory thing that you incorporate into your day, and the rest of the day is the variables that you adjust.
I think it's a good point, and to elaborate onto it is, what are your goals? What is it that you're trying to achieve? If there's a certain time limit to achieving whatever that goal is, and knowing where you're at now in relation to where you want to be, you got to ask yourself and be honest with yourself, are you doing as much as you possibly can with the time that you have in order to achieve those goals? And in conjunction with that, are you allowing the body to recover adequately so you can then continue to push it? So I'm not a big tech guy. I don't rely on tools that are available out there, like the Whoop Band or the Oura Ring. I think those are great tools, but I'm not saying that I rely on those things. So for me personally, I know I'm starting to enter a state of being where I need to give myself a little bit more recovery time. When I wake up in the morning and I check my heart rate, my resting heart rate, while I'm training, pretty adequately and pretty hard on a regular basis. When I wake up in the morning, if my heart rate, which typically is between 50 and 55 when I first wake up in the morning. So when I wake up, if it's consistently for 7 days between 50 and 55, and then all of a sudden I kind of feel a little bit off, so I'll test my heart rate when I wake up first thing in the morning, as soon as I wake up, and all of a sudden it's spiked to maybe 65 or 70. To me, that's an indicator. That's my body saying, hey, you're not quite fully recovered yet. So that means, like Sam just said, I may not train like a complete savage that particular day, but I'm still going to do something. I'm still going to go through the pace. I'm still going to break a sweat, but the level of intensity may be a little bit altered, just so I can, properly recover.
I like the point that you made there about knowing yourself. So you don't use like a wearable or a tracker or some piece of technology to tell you how you feel. I think that a lot of people unfortunately are falling into this trap of there's so much technology available to us that tells us how we feel that we have lost touch with how we actually feel.
I agree.
So we don't understand ourselves well enough to know when we're under recovering. You've mentioned this before about we're on the exact same page that I don't think overtraining is a thing. I think under recovering is a thing, and I think you've said those exact same words, and
yes.
we're 100% on the same page about that, because we just said there's 24 hours in the day. Unless you're training 24 hours a day, which nobody is doing, then you're probably not overtraining, you're not recovering. So the point that you were just making about the wearables, I think is a really important one, because if you're relying on a device to tell you that you didn't sleep well last night and you need to take the day off, what if it's wrong, right? Like these wearables are very largely inaccurate when you look at the research. Like they can be, anywhere from 3% off to 120% off in these metrics of heart rate or resting heart rate or whatever it might be, your HRV when you're sleeping. So I think disconnecting from technology and trying to get a little bit more in touch with yourself is going to help you know and learn when is the right time to push yourself and when is the right time to take that extra hour, like Ryan asked about. So when you wake up in the morning, if you do use a wearable, before you look at it, maybe ask yourself, how do I feel right now? Before you see what that says. If you go, I had a great sleep last night, I feel really good, I feel rested, but then you look at your phone and it says, no, you slept like shit, are you going to believe yourself or the phone? And if you believe the phone, then there's a problem. So I think getting back in touch with yourself is huge. Knowing when you feel like you might be getting a cold, or when a flu might be setting in, or if you've eaten well the day before, or if you've had enough to drink, or if you've had too much alcohol this week, or if you've been going out too much, or if you missed a week of training. Like how are all of those variables making you feel? And you need to kind of keep a mental checklist and a little mental picture of what you've been up to and how it's been affecting you, so that you can make the appropriate adjustments and make sure that you're staying on the right track. Because I don't think at the end of the day that the quantity of training for most people is the problem. I think it's not making sleep a priority, good nutrition a priority, hydration, stress management, time management. Like even just the example real quick of, if you look at your screen time on your phone, most people have an iPhone. I don't know if Androids do this every whatever day. Sunday, it'll pop up on your phone and tell you your screen time was down an average of 7% this week, or whatever it might be. Most people's screen time is like 9 hours a day, right? I think the average for an adult is something like 9, but a kid is like 14, and that is insane. So if you think that you need to shorten your training by an hour because you're not sleeping an hour, I guarantee you could find an hour of screen time in your day and remove that, and now it's not even a problem.
Man, that's a good point. I didn't realize those were some of the averages, and I bet you there's a lot of detailed data out there that will help you as well. I'm a little bit old school, man. I like electronics. I do. Very, very seldom will you see me, I say finger flipping the phone, because I find it such a waste of time. But what I do is I carry this around everywhere, and this is my daily journal. And what I'll take notes in is how I'm feeling when I train. If there was something that stood out, either I felt really good or I felt like just off for whatever reason. And what I can do is oftentimes I'll flip back a day or two and I'll look at what it is that I ate, or the amount of sleep that I had, or how I felt when I woke up, and I'll just jot little notes down. And it's a really good reminder for me to either focus a little bit more on sleep hygiene, or to ensure that I'm getting a little bit more fruits and vegetables if maybe I slacked off a little bit on the consumption. Because I do think that I'm convinced 100% that there are other factors that we sometimes overlook and don't consider when it really comes to optimal performance. Being able to perform when you're training as most optimally as you can, and sometimes just getting into the habit of taking a few notes throughout the day. And as you start to look back, it does keep you accountable. And it's also, it's one of those things where I read a note one time, a long time ago, stuck with me, and said, the mind will sometimes forget, but the paper will always remember. So when you write it down, you got so many things going on. We all do. We have a lot of things going on in our lives. But how much of that stuff is really important, and how much stuff is that not being prioritized properly? So when we take a note, we can look back. And sometimes I've done this, guilty, looking at my notes and like, why would I even write that down? That has no bearing on anything. Why did I write that down? There must be a reason, because why would I have made the effort to write it down? Sometimes it's a great way to just reflect and be, okay, I'm distracted by this thing, or I'm focused on something that's going to happen next week rather than being focused on what's happening right now. So it's just a great way to kind of keep me on track and keep me honest. But to bring this back, when it comes to listening to your body, like, you know, Sam and I both agree there are some pieces of tech that, yeah, it could be beneficial, but realistically, listen to your body, and you know your body better than anybody. So we have to be honest with ourselves. If you're legitimately tired because maybe you didn't have a good sleep, okay, not a big deal. Would that mean I'm not going to train intense today? No, the intensity might still be there. However, if those days become accumulative, maybe it's 2-3 days where you're continuously waking up feeling sluggish, okay, let's address that before it becomes an issue.
Mm-hmm. I think too, another part of your question, Ryan, was about, you know, if I have the flu, is forcing yourself to train problematic, or should you be prioritizing that extra little bit of rest? So you mentioned in the previous video that we had used COVID as an example with one of my clients. So I think that, like Randy just said, listening to yourself is super important because you know yourself the best. And if you wake up and you feel like absolute garbage, maybe instead of thinking that training is an all or none type of principle, it's a sliding scale. So if you're feeling better, you can train harder, and if you're feeling worse, you train less. But I think that we've all been in the boat where maybe we've had a day where we had to do a lot of sitting, like maybe you had to do a first aid training or something for your job, and you normally work a busy day, a very active day, and you've had to sit in a chair for 8 hours. There is nothing you want more after that 8 hours than to move your body, right? To stretch, to move, maybe go for a run or a bike ride or something. I think that no matter what you're dealing with, your body craves movement and activity and blood flow and some sort of stimulation. I think even when you're dealing with an acute illness, or even honestly an acute injury, if it's not something that you're directly, like, you know, if you sprain your ankle, maybe you shouldn't go running, but there's lots of other things you can do. I think your body really wants some sort of stimulation. So I think the sliding scale approach to your training is more important, and only you can know where this particular day falls on that scale.
Yeah.
But I think something is always better than nothing, and I do think that activity and training will always make you improve and feel better even when you're not feeling good. I think that it will expedite the process of you feeling better and recovering.
And to pile on with that, I can express how beneficial it was. I had 2 reconstructive shoulder surgeries on 2 different occasions, about 2 years apart. The exact same injury on both shoulders. So I had a torn bicep tendon, a torn labrum, and a damaged subscap on both shoulders. The exact same injury on both shoulders. And being in a sling for, you know, a significant amount of time, there are components of our mindset that will say, okay, I'm banged up, I cannot train. Where I really took a different approach, and even though I was in the sling, I still found ways to use a Smith machine to do squats, or I still found ways to, you know, a light shuffle or a little jog on the treadmill. I found ways to stimulate blood flow and keep the body moving, and I truly believe, to the core of my being, that's what helped expedite the recovery process. Had I just stood there or laid stagnant in my arm in a sling, you know, flipping through the phone or, you know, watching Netflix or whatever, I think that recovery process would have been, you know, quite a bit longer. So I agree with Sam, and I hopefully you take away from this, Ryan, you can still do something, just maybe dial the intensity level a little bit less or a little bit right. That sliding scale is a great analogy from Sam. Listen to your body, but don't roll over when you don't feel 100%, but that's not necessarily the answer. At the same time, when you know you're not feeling 100%, hitting the throttle to, you know, shift gears into the 6th, 7th, 8th gear might not be ideal either. So like find that sweet spot.
Yeah, I was just gonna pile onto your shoulder injury analogy there, and I had ankle surgery in December, and I was told to not put any weight on my leg for pretty much 6 weeks, be in a cast for 6 weeks, not use my leg for 6 weeks, and if I did, it could be catastrophic and all this stuff. And the day of my surgery, I went home and got on the bike, and I didn't use that leg for pushing the pedal, but I was making that leg move with my other leg on the other pedal, you know?
Yeah.
And I made it a priority every single day to get that leg moving, even if it was to the most passive extent. And I am so far above and beyond every metric that was expected of me in my recovery that I pretty much am fully recovered in 20% of the time that it would have taken an average person to recover from this surgery. And when I go back and see my doctors, they're like, we don't even need to see you, you know? So I truly and strongly believe the same as you, that the movement is super important and necessary in recovery.
And do you think, Sam, when you receive the information from, you know, either the surgeon or your physiotherapist or your strength and conditioning coach, sometimes in the medical professionals, and you know, and I'm certainly not suggesting that whatever your doctor says, don't listen to it. That's not it. That's not what I'm saying at all. But would you say, based on your experience, sometimes the doctor's protocol in recovery may err on the side of caution, given that, you know, the average Joe may not be as fit as you. The average Joe may not be as active as you. So they err on the side of caution because they want to be safe. They want to make sure that all of the good work that they did to get your joint fixed up is not going to get destroyed.
Yeah.
So they tend to err on the side of, you know, let's be a little bit safer.
Absolutely. I think that they develop these post-op recovery protocols for the less than the average. I think they want you to be as careful as possible and guarantee that nothing will go wrong, so they don't have to repeat the surgery or that you don't re-injure yourself. And I like you, I totally agree. Like, I know that most people are not going to be like me or have the same knowledge about rehabilitation and training as I do. So yeah, I'm definitely not saying throw away the protocol and do whatever the hell you want to do. I just know that I know myself well enough, like what we were just talking about, that I knew that I could do more than what they were telling me to do, and I knew how to work within the safety restrictions and push myself just enough that I would get better sooner and feel better sooner without risking anything. But that is a very fine line, and they definitely plan for you to be on the side of caution and extra careful. But I think that that's not a good thing, because I think that it really prevents people from coming back better after surgeries. I think that our healthcare system is a little bit broken in the sense that they don't have time to personalize anything. They don't have the manpower, they don't have the resources. Like, they told me not to do physio for 6 weeks. I was like, I'm going to physio like in 7 days. Like, I'm gonna go right away and get something done. Like, there's always something you can do. But if I had followed those instructions, I would have started physio 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
You know, like, that is bananas. I was running 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I think that what we were talking about earlier about knowing yourself is why I was able to do that. But I wish the healthcare system was able to put a little bit more attention on people and help them personalize their recovery plans so that they can come back better and that they can feel better, and that it's not so passive and so cautious. I think being too cautious is problematic.
You're right, and I do too. We have to take risks for sure, and a little bit from the healthcare professionals for sure. There's a little bit of onus on them to say, okay, you can probably do this. Get to know the person a little bit, understand their lifestyle a little bit, so they can provide a little bit more of a rigorous or more intensified recovery protocol. But part of it too is also on the individual. So there's a little bit of give and take. A little bit of accountability needs to be adhered to as well. You know, because if we're not considering, you know, how we're resting properly, how we're recovering properly, if we're not considering the nutrition that we're consuming in our bodies, like, part of that recovery is 100% directly correlated to what we consume. So if you're eating ding dong, I always say this, man, people that are watching are probably getting tired of hearing this, but I don't care because I believe in it. If you're eating ding dongs and ho-hos, it's gonna have an effect, right? So if you consume good nutrition in conjunction with a healthy, adequate recovery protocol, man, what we are capable of doing as humans is that there is no limit. There is no limit.
Yeah.
So, you know, you and I both agree. You'll never ever hear me say such thing as overtraining. I don't believe in it. Under recovery is definitely a thing. But when we train, I know personally, I train like I may not have the opportunity to train tomorrow. So I want to leave it all on the mat. I want to leave it all in the gym. I just want to be a better version of myself today, so I'm more prepared for tomorrow. That being said, sometimes I do need to be a little bit more cognizant of the recovery protocol. So hopefully that answers that question. Some great insight from Sam, and the sliding scale is a great analogy. Like, be aware, but how do you? So sometimes the question we'll ask, well, how do you become more aware? Pay attention. But do things and pay attention to how you feel. There's going to be sometimes, a lot of times, our bodies will work in like a circadian rhythm, right? So 24 hours, what we did and what we consumed yesterday will have an effect today. What we consume and what we do today will have an effect tomorrow. No different than your nutrition, no different than your sleeping pattern. So what you do right now is most important for how you perform tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So let's lead into, so hopefully that answers that question, Ryan. And please, if it doesn't, or you'd like us to elaborate, by all means, add some comments. Next question from Arsteve Gill. He asked, what does an average training a training week look like for Sam and I? And what does a typical session consist of? That's a pretty good question. So what does a typical week look like? And then what does a typical session consist of? That's a really good question. You want to start with this one?
I was saying to Randy that this is a great question, and this is a great opportunity for you guys to maybe respond to us in the comments, where we don't know necessarily how in-depth you want us to go with an answer like this, because Randy and I, as professionals in this field, put a ton of thought into our training programs. So much so that we could talk for, honestly, like hours about what we think about when we're designing programs for our clients or for ourselves. So we're going to give an answer today that we think is kind of in the middle. But if you want more information, let us know. Or if it's too complicated, let us know, because we don't really know what's going to resonate the best with you. For example, Randy trains me for my MMA training. So I've been off for a little bit from that because of my surgery, but Randy, I'm sure, can speak to what his planned progression was from day one of the first day he met me to where we're at now, and how he envisions the future going, and what steps and are kind of in that ladder of learning for me, from day one to day of competition, essentially. Like, I think that'd be a cool route we could use as an example here.
Yeah. So giving the rapport that's built with myself and an athlete, I'll talk about the relationship first, and then I'll talk about what I do for myself. The rapport, it's going to take some time to build trust and build comfort and build understanding of. For an example, when Sam comes in to train, or any clients that I'm so lucky to have as clients, I'll ask them, how are you feeling today? Well, there's going to be days where that response might be, I feel great, I'm on top of the world. And as the training session starts to unfold, if I'm paying attention, which as a professional I am, I can tell if that person is not feeling 100%. They want to feel 100%, but maybe they're not. So it's up to me to adjust the dial. I'm either going to crank it up if they're actually really on top of the world, or if they're dragging a little bit. So that's up to me to ensure that they are pushed and they're going to get something out of that session, but we're not going to overload them to the point where they're broken. So there's a fine line between what that looks like. Now, when I roll out a program for somebody, even if it's that session, I'm always prepared to pivot, always prepared to provide a regression, or to increase the intensity, or even maybe change the complete modality altogether. That's always in the back of my mind. That being said, when the session starts, there's always going to be a decent warm-up. Always. There'll always be something that will be a movement pattern, oftentimes that is going to mimic or replicate what it is that we're actually going to train. So for an example, if we're doing some MMA training where there's a clinch or a ground component built in, well, as part of the warm-up, we're going to move the body in a clinch and or ground movement pattern. That way the body kind of connects with what motor neurons are going to be fired when we do start training. So they're already primed. So it's essentially we're priming both the cognitive and the physical sensation to come together. So that's priority number one. Priority number two is, what is the aim? What is the end state? We have say an hour to train. What is it that we're trying to achieve in that hour? So we have a plan, have a goal going into it. So warm up, and then the meat of the workout, for example, what is that we're going to achieve at the end of this 90 minutes or 60 minutes, whatever your session might be. And then within that meat of the training component, is there an element where we can hit the throttle, shift gears a little bit, or is there an element where we need to, decrease the volume a little bit, decrease the speed or intensity just a little bit? Because at the end of the day, the intensity should not, in my opinion, deter or detract from the technical lift or the technical technique or whatever the component is that really is technically sound. What we do though is, in the technical component, we're going to add some conditioning that is going to supplement or support what it is that we're doing. So that's a typical session. That's what a typical session would look like. And then we would summarize it with a good cool down and stretch. Mm-hmm. That would be a typical hour session, given the fact that when that athlete comes in, they're going to have good days, going to have bad days. it's up to me to sometimes challenge them when they're saying, oh man, I'm dragging ass, I didn't feel very good, you know, I only had 2 hours sleep last night because of this, this, and this. Well, sometimes, believe it or not, that's gonna be the session, I'm gonna crank it up. And people are like, why would you do that? Because what I'm trying to do is show people what they're capable of and let people see that just because you're feeling a 3 doesn't mean that you're not capable of a 5, right? And it's sometimes just being able to push that individual outside of their comfort zone.
I know that every time when I come in and you're asking me the normal questions of the day, it's like, would you have breakfast? Like, how did you sleep last night? What's your energy on a scale of 1 to 5? I'm on the bike and I'm always like, 5, let's go. I'm always a 5. I don't know if I've ever said less than a 5.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a mentality thing there too. I'm a little competitive with it.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. So like something that you've talked about in previous videos and we've talked about is kind of crawling before you walk and walking before you run.
Yes.
And I know I've noticed in the progression of our training that we started with extremely basic stuff that I didn't even know how it connected to MMA. And then as time went on, then I could see why we did those things that I didn't really understand why we were doing them.
Right.
Because then it taught me how to move my body better, or it taught me, you know, a certain body movement pattern that was useful for a technique down the line. So there's also the progression of technical aspects, and once you get to know me and as the client better, then you can adjust the conditioning, for example, or you know that I really prefer certain lifts and really don't like other ones, and you know that I hate the bike, so you put me on the bike more because I hate it. And you can see that it kind of is like this. There's this adjustment period at the beginning, and you kind of find our niche with each other, and then after that, it's like the crawl, walk, run.
Yes.
Crawl, walk, run. It's kind of like on repeat.
That's exactly the crawl, walk, run philosophy is not new. I guess that's nomenclature that's been around the training fields for a long, long time. But I will elaborate a little bit. When I have the opportunity to share knowledge, expertise, skills in any type of field, anything, I have the philosophy that I try to enter with. We first do the movement technically sound. So that would be the crawl. Do the movement first and understand why we do that movement. And then the walk component would be, then we'd add speed. So once we understand the movement, then we're gonna do it under a little bit of speed. And then the run component would be, then we're gonna do it while we're facing active resistance, right? So first understand it technically and why we do what we do. Then we add speed, and then we add resistance. And I feel like that is a formula that A, helps connect with the athlete, but B, it enables their learning curve to really grow, and then they become a stronger version of themselves, whether that's a technical component with shooting, whether that's an MMA component in terms of striking or clinch or ground. Understand the why first, and then really get good at that movement, then add some speed, and then add some active resistance. And I truly believe that is, for me, it's been working really well. It's a formula that I find no matter the athlete's capability, it connects well with them, and it helps with their overall learning curve.
And I know another principle is the 70-30 principle, and I think that tying those together is very important, which is that 70% of the time you do things that you're familiar with, maybe that you're good at, if you want to think about it that way.
The opposite.
And then,
the opposite.
Okay.
Yeah, so 70% of the things that we have already identified as limitations. We're not really good at it yet, and then 30% we focus on the things we're already good at because we like doing them, and that's what that's what we're going to rely on, especially under stress or duress. We're going to do those things that we're really good at because we have confidence in them. Right.
So I think that principle is a really good general principle for your question, which was how do we structure a training block or a week, for example. So 30% of the time you're doing stuff that you really enjoy and that you're really good at, but 70% of your programming is revolving around things that you really need to improve upon.
That's right. Yeah. And for for a typical, and this is a great component of the question, for a typical session for myself, I'll be confident when I say there is no typical session. It's always different. When I come into the gym, I come in and I train with purpose, but what I did last workout, I probably won't see that again for a couple of weeks. I really try to keep my body guessing, always doing something different. Sometimes, there might be a spatial awareness. I'm trying to just become a little bit more aware of my body when I'm in different positions. Sometimes I'm working just a complete strength. So I'm lifting heavy weights, long, recovery times between each set. And then sometimes it's a lot of conditioning where I stay moving for 30 minutes. Sometimes, like Sam and I were talking a few minutes ago, sometimes my workout is literally 15 minutes. That's it. But that 15 minutes, from the bell to bell, that 15 minutes, full intensity, full speed, full movement. So it's always different. My body is always guessing, like, what are you doing to me today? You know, so that's why I say, like, I don't really have a typical training session. It's always different.
Yeah, the only thing typical about it is that you're going to warm up.
Yep.
There's going to be a large portion in the middle that is the meat of the workout, and you're going to cool down. That's the guarantee. That's the template. That's the outline. But what falls into the center of that training program is going to depend on what you want to do that day, what you're feeling like you need to work on that day, what you have time for, you know, all those factors. But I think it might be hard to say, like Randy just said, what a typical week looks like, but in terms of the exercises, that's what I was alluding to at the beginning of introducing this question, which is like, I don't really know how specific you want this answer to be, because there's so many variables that go into it that I don't know if everybody sees when they're not on our side of the whiteboard writing down the workout. But we want to challenge the body in as many ways as possible strategically. So like Randy said, one day maybe a super hard strength day, and another day maybe super conditioning dominant. A day maybe very mobility focused. He may have a day on the range. So he's got maybe more things that he's working on than the average person. Maybe the average person doesn't do any shooting. They don't need to worry about their conditioning, they think. We think you do. So they're more just lifting. So maybe that's why this question comes up sometimes. People are like, well, how often should I train legs? And how often should I train my upper body? I think that's kind of the default template people sometimes look for with this question. So it kind of depends on your goal. So if your goal is to be a well-rounded athlete who is capable of responding to anything that comes their way, then you need to challenge your body in several different domains regularly. And you can think of it as like a rotational schedule maybe. Like if you are like, okay, so now I'm starting to think about my training differently. Like maybe after this few minutes of us talking about it, you're like, I should think about my training differently. What are you know, your 3, 4, 5 things that you want to focus on? Strength, conditioning, mobility, maybe running is a priority, maybe swimming is a priority. You've got 5 things. So if you're going to train 5 days a week, maybe you do a day that's focused on each of those 5 things, and then you just rinse and repeat every week. But you don't necessarily have to repeat week to week the same things, unless you really want to. I mean, some people really like routine and knowing, memorizing a workout and repeating it a few times before they change it. But then there's people like Randy and myself who like to do something different every time because it's more challenging. It's just what gets us going. So there's a little scale there too of what people like. But essentially, think about your goals. What components of your training do you need to focus on to reach those goals? And then cycle through them, rotate through them, make sure you're addressing all of them at some point. I think that it's easy to fall in the trap of doing too much every time you train by thinking you need to address all 5 every day. And that's when people tend to get overwhelmed, confused, and bored or stressed about their training because there's too much to do every day. They're suddenly spending an hour and a half, 2 hours in the gym, and they don't know what the goal was. One of my old colleagues used to tell me when I was starting to work with professional hockey players, he's like, these guys, they come into the gym, they don't want to know the science behind their workout. They want to look at you and they want to look at the workout and go, what am I getting better at today? And they should be able to look at the workout and within 30 seconds, today is a day that I'm getting stronger, or today is a day that I'm getting better conditioned. It should be very clear and very obvious what the goal of the training session is. And that is really going to simplify your training and improve your outcomes.
I think it's awesome. Keep it simple. Try real hard not to overcomplicate it. Keep it simple, keep it fun. And remember, like, today is today, and then tomorrow it's a new challenge. It's a new endeavor. So focus. I know you've heard me say this before, but be where your feet are. Enjoy the moment that you're in right today, right now. You go to the gym, whatever that looks like for you, and try to keep it as simple as possible. Move your body. Break a sweat every day, and things are really going to do well for you, I believe. This is a really good question because we could literally talk about this for quite some time. In a typical session, hopefully what you take away from this, a typical session is going to be different for every single person. A soccer mom who's busy taking care of 3 kids at home, well, the amount of time that she gets at the gym, might be very, very different than a guy who is currently single, working from home, etc. Things will be different. So a typical session for you is going to be very, very different than a typical session for Sam and I. So I guess general rules of thumb, aim to break a sweat every day. Keep your workout simple, but have a goal so you know what it is that you're trying to achieve for that particular session.
I think there was a second part to this question, which I want to make sure we address, which was, I think the last line of your question was, what does it mean to train like a savage? Because Randy said that in his last video. So what we had discussed is that we're going to put together essentially a video of a typical session that we would do together, and we'll talk about what we're doing and why, and put that up so that you can see an actual session, because maybe that'll be a little bit more useful as opposed to us just kind of giving some general principles.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
But maybe even with the general rules of thumb that you just put out, we could take those to kind of zoom in a little further, and maybe training like a savage consists of resting very little, using a timer to keep yourself accountable, using weights that are super challenging, and when you finish every rep, you couldn't have done another rep. Maybe it means that you're only doing things that are extremely difficult and nothing's easy.
Yeah.
Maybe there's little tiny principles of Randy's sessions, because he's pretty hardcore, that don't necessarily apply to everybody else, but that's what training like a savage looks like for Randy. So maybe it's those principles apply to some of his training sessions, maybe not all, but maybe the majority, so it depends on the person probably what that means.
It's a great point, and we will do that. We're going to do that video for you. It's a great point though, and it brought up something that a story from another gentleman who I work with. So he's a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, and he was telling me about his program that he's utilizing, and he's training for a very specific thing. So he's looking to succeed for future selection. And he was telling me about one of the workouts that I drew up for him. And so he did the workout, and the next day he went to work, and it was a surprise, I think 10K rucksack march. So when he told me about this story, he was a little bit pissed off, I guess, because he wasn't expecting to do that 10K rucksack march. And he crushed himself during the workout that I had prepared for him the night before. And I said to him, that's not, a slag on your chain of command. They have the right, as a soldier, you should be surprised from time to time. You should be, put through the ringer from time to time when you haven't prepared for it. Because the idea is you're always prepared. You're prepared for the inevitable, that we don't know what's going to happen when we walk outside, what is going to be presented or thrown our way. So when I train, and the savage analogy I use pretty often, I'm reserving a little bit, and I'm keeping a little bit in reserve, because absolutely I want to crush it when I'm at the gym. But if my concern is, I did legs yesterday, so somebody confronts me and I get into a physical confrontation, do you think I'm going to say, hey, take it easy, man, I just did legs yesterday, so maybe we sit this one out, come back and see me tomorrow? No, I want to be in a position that I can explode. And if I need to deal with somebody physically, then I'm in a position to do so, not because, I did a killer workout yesterday. So this young man that I'm working with, what I said to him today, or that particular time, was, okay, so your legs were jacked from yesterday's workout. You were surprised by, a 10-kilometer rucksack march that you weren't planning for. So here's a great opportunity to persevere, overcome, find a way for your body to move and adapt through discomfort. Yeah, you're a little bit sore from yesterday, but you're not dead. Mm-hmm. You are still capable of moving, so get over it, instead of, allowing these thoughts to enter the head, like, oh man, I'm gonna end up getting hurt. These guys, they should let us know ahead of time. No, they shouldn't. Mm-hmm. No, they shouldn't. It's up to you to be able to do that consistently. So yes, train like a savage, but always think, leave a little bit in reserve, because we just don't know what the real world may present to us. I had a great conversation with another gentleman who's an orthopedic surgeon, and he on his channel and what he shares with people, which is awesome, it's all about movement. Being a better mover and being able to move your body. And one time, him and I had probably a 45-minute conversation over the phone, and I think the conversation, it went down the road where I said, you know what, the real world doesn't give a shit how you feel. If we walk outside right now and we slip on black ice and we throw our back out, well, is that the environment, attacking us, or is that our inability to adapt and adjust to those uncertainties that we didn't expect, right? So being able to move, putting your body in, precarious positions from time to time, I think is a good thing. There's nothing dangerous about purposely putting your toe in a position that's, looking outwards as you're into a squat, especially if we decide to put our foot there. I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with the knee being over the toe when you're in a specific movement. These are good things that the reality of the way we live as human beings is our bodies are going to do certain things. So if we're always lifting, wait, I got to put my lifting shoes on, wait, I got to put my lifting belt on. If that is what you realize, or that's what you have connected with a good training session, I think you could be missing something. I think there's a component of your training that you could definitely elaborate on and really improve.
I think another way to frame what you were just saying too is you were saying like the world doesn't care what you did in your training session yesterday. Something could happen tomorrow and you can't plan for that. There's also the flip side, which is one of the worst feelings is regretting that you didn't do more. And I think that's a very applicable there's a very applicable time to think of that, which is an injury. So let's say that today I go walking outside and I fall and break my arm. I am going to be pissed that I didn't train my upper body harder, because now I can't train my upper body for a while, right? So you want to be as prepared as possible for whatever comes your way. And the only way to do that is by trying to push your limits all the time, because there will come a time when something happens to you or happened as a result of something that you didn't have control of and you could have been better prepared, and there's no worse feeling than not being prepared for that. So I think that that's very important. The thing you were just saying too about training in precarious positions, I just put up a post on my Instagram about this a couple of days ago where, how often are you moving perfectly symmetrically and robotically as a human, whether it's your day-to-day life, sport, or your physical activity of choice? Almost never. Almost never. Even when you're walking, you're not walking perfectly straight. Usually one foot is slightly different than the other. Maybe you're carrying groceries always in one side of your body and not the other. When you open your car door, do you alternate hands? You always open it with the same hand probably, right? So you have these imbalances and you never do everything perfectly symmetrically. So why would you train always perfectly symmetrically? You should expose your body to asymmetrical challenges so that in a moment of extreme asymmetry, you can deal with it and it will not hurt you or cause a negative outcome. So, doing pull-ups where one hand is this way and one hand is this way, it's fun to do something different, but it's also cool because your body's getting challenged completely differently left to right. You can still switch sides, so both sides have had a try at it. Maybe you hold a heavier dumbbell in one hand than the other when you're doing split squats. Maybe you do a push-up where one hand's up high and one hand is down low and your shoulders have to work differently. Your core stability, your coordination, your balance, your body awareness, all of those things are going to improve when you expose your body to these asymmetrical training stimuli, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. Keep it, mix it up and keep your body guessing, I think is the message.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so Julie from Winnipeg sent me an email and she says, how do I stay motivated, or how do we stay motivated to train so consistently? She said, sometimes I get bored with training, or I go to the gym and I feel unmotivated to even be there. That's a good question.
It's a tough one.
What motivates me to train consistently? I train to be as bulletproof as I possibly can. So the reality of whatever I'm faced with in the real world, I can handle. That's why I train. I don't train for vanity. I just happen to look pretty good for 43 years old. That's just a positive byproduct. When I train to be a hard target. That's what motivates me.
And I think that'll be different for everybody based on their background and their goals and their experience. And a soccer mom is not training to be bulletproof probably, but it doesn't mean you can't have that mindset, right? Like, what are you bulletproof to? Maybe for you, you're trying to be bulletproof to a competitor in an MMA competition or something. Maybe you're training to literally be hard to hit by a bullet if you're like a soldier or whatever it might be, or in the military realm. Maybe bulletproof means bulletproof to injuries of slipping on ice if you're an elderly person. So I think that you can kind of adjust that concept of Randy's to fit your life, and how to still be challenging. And
I think you're bang on, and to motivate Julie, because I don't know Julie, and I think this is a great point that Sam brings up, and an oversight on my part. I should really dig in a little bit to find out, like, I don't know anything about Julie. This is a great question. She's obviously following me on some sort of social media. She likes the way I train. She just maybe finds it interesting that I train as much as I do. I'm not sure. That's up to me to ask these questions. But I think Sam is bringing up a good point. My motivation is going to be a little bit different than Julie's, you know, and if Julie is looking for motivation, maybe it's, you know, to whatever, wear that specific dress that she has planned for an upcoming wedding. You know, I don't know, maybe that's her motivation. I don't know. So, you know, you had a great point, and as you're saying it, I'm realizing, wow, I should ask more questions.
And there's so many goals that people have, like being able to, you know, feel confident in a certain dress for a wedding is definitely a lot of people's goals. Maybe it's to recover from an injury. Maybe it's to prepare for a competition. And I think an important thing to realize too is that your goals are constantly evolving, depending on your life stage, your activities, and the demands being placed on you. So maybe last year your motivation was that wedding. This year, maybe your motivation is to bounce back from an injury. Maybe next year your motivation is you're hitting the 50th year of your life and you're like, I want to be in the best shape that I've ever been at 50. So I think understanding too that your goals and your motivation will be fluid will help you stay motivated, because then you're not adhering to a very rigid ideology as to what you're training for forever, because it may not always apply. And another thing that I always like to say to people, because I think motivation is probably one of the most Googled topics. Motivational quotes, motivational videos, motivational music, motivational speakers, motivational podcasts, motivational whatever. It's probably one of the top Googled searches. I think that I read once, I could be getting this wrong, but it was motivation is motive in action or something like that. And essentially motivation does not come before action. Action comes before motivation. So your actions motivate you to create further action. So I think if you think about that in that perspective, it may motivate you more as opposed to waiting for motivation. So you don't sit at your front door looking at your running shoes and wait for them to say, all right, let's go, put me on, let's go for a run. You have to put your shoes on first before you can run, right? So I think that taking the action first is how you can often motivate yourself to create more action.
That's a good point, and it made me think of something. So hopefully this resonates with Julie or other people that have a similar question. So finding motivation to go to the gym and get after it and do something physical. One thing that I use as motivation is the terminology or the nomenclature that I get to do this. I don't have to do it. I get to do it. And I have an uncle who's a paraplegic, and I look up to him. He's a brilliant man. He's been in a wheelchair since he was 19 years old. And sometimes when I'm feeling lazy, I'm human. I have days like that too, believe it or not, or I'm feeling unmotivated. I think of him, and I think to myself, if he could, he would. So that gets me going, right? So that's what I use sometimes. When you get to the gym, if the motivation is, well, what do I do when I'm in the gym? This is where you can hire people like Sam and other personal trainers who will help you get out of your own way. They will help you educate you on the machinery that you're using, or even just a set of dumbbells, what to do with a set of dumbbells. That can be the motivation. So motivation can be different things for different people. And you know, in this particular case, if it's really what do you do when you get to the gym, the fact that you're at the gym, that's a small success. Be proud of that victory. Do something. Get your body moving. Be open to ask questions. Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, ma'am. Just curious. That movement that you're doing, what is that for? And if you don't know, guess what? You just sparked a conversation with somebody. Maybe you built some rapport, and lo and behold, you just found a new movement pattern that you can add into your repertoire.
Yeah, and I like what you said too about, you know, you can hire someone, like you should look at other avenues if you're feeling bored with your training, which is what Julie mentioned. There is so many ways to be active and to train, but obviously the average person who works a 9 to 5, has kids, has all these responsibilities, they don't have time to decipher everything and find their perfect thing. So sometimes asking for help from somebody, even a friend or a colleague or somebody else, and trying a new activity can spark a new interest. I don't want to say spark motivation, because I think motivation is short-lived, but an interest. Maybe trying new things will help you find that activity that you really enjoy and that is something you're always looking forward to doing. Maybe the gym isn't for everyone, you know? Like, it doesn't have to be the only activity you do to be active. Maybe you like skiing, maybe you like biking, maybe you want to go rock climbing, maybe you like swimming. There is so many activities, there's so many clubs, there's so many adults especially out there playing in leagues for various sports and activities, and they're all in the same boat trying to find the thing that they like doing to stay active. So I think that exploring a little bit and having the courage to explore and try new things can really open up lots of doors for that motivation to come naturally and to not be the limiting factor.
Yeah, it's great advice, good point. There's lots of things that we can do. You know, ask questions like you are, you know, which is good. So hopefully there's a little nugget that either Sam or myself shared with you that, you know, you can hang on to and then implement that tomorrow. And really, you know, move the body, get moving, do something every single day, do something. It doesn't have to take hours and hours out of your day, but do something to stay active.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. All right, I think that addresses the questions that we had for this week. Keep them coming, like always. We appreciate your feedback. We appreciate the comments, and Sam and I will work on a video, and we'll give you guys an example of a workout that we'll do, something that we would either do together or something that we would maybe put a client through, and that'll give you a couple of ideas. Cool. All right. On that note, thank you very much, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Sam. As always, appreciate it, and look forward to this next week.
Awesome.